Hey everyone, it's me again, Chicken Oople. Welcome to Coaching Casuals on Boons and Conditions. As the title says, in this video we're going to be looking at the different boons and conditions in Guild Wars 2. We're going to understand what that means, understand how applying multiple boons and conditions behave, and briefly look at how characters can convert boons into conditions, or how they can convert conditions into boons, and what exactly that means. This is the second video in our Coaching Casual series, so if you didn't watch the first on attributes and prefixes, go watch that one and then come on back. I'll be referencing some of the information in that video. And if you could help me out, share this video with your friends, guilds, and on social media so we can teach more people about the mechanics of Guild Wars 2. Effects are things that can be applied to a character, NPC, or enemy, and boons and conditions are two classifications of effects. I'll be going into a detailed review of each of the different boons and conditions shortly, but I first wanted to explain the concept of effect stacking, because when we review the different types of boons and conditions, we'll look at how each of them stack. Every boon and condition can be applied multiple times, and as you apply multiples of the same effect, a stack of the boon or condition will start to build. On the UI, this is represented as an icon, which represents the boon or condition, and a numeric value indicating how many stacks of that effect that you have on your target. These icons can be found to the right of your health globe, by your party member faces, or under your target's health bar. Stacks will behave in one of two ways. The duration of the stack will increase, or the intensity of the stack will increase. The behavior of the duration and intensity stacking might not behave as you would expect though. The best way I can think to visualize each of these stack mechanics is to view them on a timeline, so let's do that. In this, time is going to flow to the right, and the length of the bar indicates its duration, and the thickness of a bar indicates its power. The first we'll look at is the duration stacking. Duration stacking is when the overall duration of a boon or condition is increased. The simplest illustration of this is with effects that have the same exact effect level being added to a stack. The duration simply increases by the sum of all of that type of effect. That's pretty simple. If you have an effect that lasts for 8 seconds, and then you apply the same exact effect with the same power for another 8 seconds, then it just extends the effect for 16 seconds. This gets complicated though when we start looking at different strengths of effects. Sometimes an effect could be made stronger by your attributes or the attributes of the person who gave you the effect. One such example is with retaliation, an effect that is affected by power. If you have 1000 power and you give yourself retaliation for 8 seconds, and then 4 seconds after you first applied it, someone with 1500 power gives you another 8 seconds of retaliation, the stronger effect in the stack will be given priority, giving you a more effective retaliation while increasing the duration of the effect overall. The second half of your first stack would then get finished after the strong stack finishes. This means if you receive a lot of a single type of condition or boon, the game is going to give you the strongest effect first, and then scale down to the weakest effect, until the stack is entirely gone, or until a stronger effect is added to the stack, causing the duration to increase and the stronger effect to take precedence. Know that not all boons and conditions will have modified values though. Some are just straight percentages that don't get stronger per se. The second stack type is intensity stacking. Intensity stacking is when the effect just layers on top of itself. The duration of each individual effect is maintained by itself, so we're not shifting effects around by priority or anything like that. Whatever effect is applied for its duration. One way we can illustrate this on our timeline is with an effect like bleeding. If you apply one stack of bleeding every 2 seconds, it would look something like this. At 2 seconds you would get a second stack, in 4 seconds you would get a third stack, in 6 seconds you would have a fourth stack, and at 8 seconds you would get a fifth stack. But at this point, your first stack would have expired. In this situation, your stacks are dealing cumulative damage, stacking intensity. We can see that between seconds 6 and 10 on the timeline, you would be dealing the most damage, and this damage would scale down as time goes on if you don't continue adding stacks of bleeding. Realistically though, with multiple people applying different strengths and durations of bleeding, the timeline would look something more like this. Regardless of power of the bleeding ability or the length of the bleed, each stack is applied individually and they expire individually. Nothing shifts to accommodate stronger stacks or longer stacks. There are some professions that can rapidly stack conditions and boons, and by increasing your attributes, which we covered in the first video, and using different equipment upgrades, which we're going to be covering in a future video, then you can increase the effectiveness and duration of your boons and conditions. It's worth noting that not all boons and conditions are equal. They have different caps to how large stacks can be, effectiveness, duration, etc. So let's look at them individually, starting with boons. Boons are effects that you can apply to yourself or other players that grant a positive effect. Boons in-game are illustrated by a yellow and white icon in the shape of an arrow that is pointing up. Just think, up arrow means your stats go up. There are currently 12 boons in the game, each being functionally different from the next. The first is Aegis, and it stacks duration and is represented by a shield, because shields block things. It is a damage mitigation boon that will block whatever single attack you are hit with after the boon is applied. Once you are struck, the boon expires. Aegis will max out at 9 stacks. Alacrity stacks duration and is represented by a clock, and it's only available to the Chronomancers and Renegades. The Alacrity effect will cause all of your skills to recharge 25% faster for the duration of the effect, an effect that is desired for raid compositions. Alacrity maxes out at 9 stacks. Fury stacks duration and is represented by a kapow symbol, because I have no other way to describe that symbol. Fury will grant a 20% increase to your critical chance. This boon also has a duration cap of 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Fury maxes out at 9 stacks. Protection stacks duration and is represented by a helmet, because that protects your head. It is a damage mitigation boon that reduces direct damage received by 33%. Like other direct damage mitigation, this does not protect against conditions. Protection maxes at 5 stacks. Quickness stacks duration and is represented by a guy sprinting. Even though the icon shows a person running, this boon doesn't actually impact movement speed. It increases your attack and skill speeds by 50%. Quickness maxes at 5 stacks. Swiftness stacks duration and is represented as a boot. Swiftness is the movement speed boon. This boon normally grants a 33% increase to the player's movement speed, but it is possible that the speed be increased to 66% with some upgrades, like a superior rune of speed. I don't think it can go any higher than that though. Drop a comment below if you know how to increase run speeds above 66%. Swiftness will max out at 9 stacks. Might stacks intensity and is represented by a sword. This is a damage increase boon, where each stack increases both power and condition damage. That means it affects all form of damage that you can deliver to a foe. Another interesting fact is that conditions that you already have applied are affected by this effect, so Might will make your existing conditions do more damage. The effect of this boon will scale up with your effective level. Lower levels will receive less of an increase, but at level 80, both power and condition damage will receive plus 30 per stack. Might maxes out at 25 stacks, meaning a full stack will net the player plus 750 damage and condition damage. Regeneration stacks duration and is represented by 3 crosses, because 1 or 2 wouldn't work. This is a healing over time boon, which grants health per second. The healing power attribute and casting player's effective level affect the actual healing done. There is an equation for regeneration, which I confirmed with one of my own characters. The equation is, at level 80, 1/8 of your healing power plus 130, and that's going to equal how much health you earn per second. One of my characters had a 5.5 second regen ability, and he only had about 250 healing power. Casting regeneration, I was getting about 156 health per second. That's 205 divided by 8 equals 25.625 plus 130 equals 156. The half-second tick at the end was somewhere in the middle of that. Regeneration maxes out at 5 stacks. Resistance stacks duration, and it is represented by this thing. I have no idea what that even is. The top of a street lamp? An Imperial Star Destroyer? So the effect temporarily negates the effect of all conditions applied to the target. If you're feared away, bleeding heavily, slowed, or whatever, this negates all of those effects completely. While under resistance, your conditions will keep ticking down, and when resistance runs out, your conditions will continue to affect you. Resistance is going to max out at 5 stacks. Stability stacks intensity and is represented by a Greek column, because it holds things up and keeps things stable, I guess? Stability has a good in-game description, which states, cannot be knocked down, pushed back, pulled, launched, stunned, dazed, floated, sunk, feared, or taunted. I'll be covering this boon in more detail in the next video in the series. The boon can stack up to 25 times, and every incoming condition that would have done one of the aforementioned crowd control effects will peel back 1 stability off the stack. If you want to know when the crowd control video comes out, make sure you subscribe. Retaliation stacks duration and is represented by a fist. This boon will reflect some of the incoming damage back to your attacker, but it will not reduce the amount of damage you take. Power affects the amount of reflected damage, but it's the power of the person who applies retaliation. If you have a low power build and your friend who has a Berserker's build both apply retaliation to you at the same time, your friend's retaliation will take precedence due to the power duration stacking stuff we talked about earlier. Retaliation maxes at 5 stacks. And finally, Vigor. This stacks duration and is represented by a leaf. This boon increases endurance regeneration by 50%, allowing affected targets to dodge more often. Endurance regeneration is one of those hidden attributes I mentioned in the first video. There is 100% cap to endurance regeneration, and it's hard to know if you're actually at the cap at that point, but through some upgrade mixing and matching, you can hit the 100% cap for Vigor. Vigor maxes at 5 stacks. Unlike boons, conditions apply negative effects to their target. There are 14 conditions in the game, and they're illustrated by a red and black icon in the shape of an arrow that is pointing down. Easy to remember the iconography here, since the down arrow means your stats go down. For conditions, I'm only going to be talking about the effects on PvE content because PvP balance changes every couple months, and it could easily change this. So if you want to see exactly how these conditions calculate in PvP, check the wiki for the condition name and you'll see the equations. Bleeding stacks intensity and is represented by a drop of blood. Bleeding is straightforward and it just deals damage over time. Bleeding can stack up to 1,500 times on your target. Burning stacks intensity and is represented by flames. Burning is also straightforward and deals damage over time, but based on the equations, burning would deal many times more damage than bleeding. A level 80 character with 300 condition damage would deal about 180 burning damage per second, where that same character would deal near 50 bleeding damage per second. While burning does more damage, there are plenty of characters in the game that are immune to burning. Burning stacks up to 1,500 times on your target, and your target will have flames coming from them when under the effects of burning. Torment stacks intensity and is represented by an angry monster face. Torment inflicts damage over time, and the amount of damage that is dealt is based on the condition damage of the attacker and whether the victim is stationary or not. Based on my terrible math skills, stationary victims will take about 50% less damage than those that are moving. Torment can stack up to 1,500 times on a target. Visually, the character will have a black fog around their feet when they're tormented. Poison stacks intensity and is represented by a skull. The amount of damage done per second is affected by condition damage being added to the base value. Poison has other negative effects of reducing your healing effectiveness by 33%, but this decrease in healing effectiveness is a static 33% and isn't impacted by stacks. Poison can stack up to 1,500 times on a target. Visually, the character will have a green tint and there'll be little skulls popping out of their head. Confusion stacks intensity and is represented by a spiral. This is another damage over time ability. The true damage is done when your confused target activates a skill. Using a skill under confusion will deal additional damage. Confusion can stack up to 1,500 times, and visually the character will have purple spirals over their head. Vulnerability stacks intensity and is represented by a broken shield. This condition causes the target to take 1% additional damage for each stack. The condition can stack up to 25 times on the target. Fear stacks duration and is represented by a ghost face, similar to the painting by Edvard Munch. This condition causes the target to run directly away from the person who cast Fear, interrupting the target's spells and attacks. Feared players can be run off of cliffs, which is always funny. Fear can stack up to 5 times, and players inflicted with Fear will have green skulls above their heads. Taunt stacks duration and is represented by a silly face. Unlike Fear, Taunt causes the target to run directly toward the caster, forcing the target to only use its auto attack skills. All other skills will be disabled, except for those who are considered stun breakers, which we're going to be looking at in the next video. Unfortunately, I have no idea how many times Taunt can stack, so if somebody knows, leave a comment below. Crippled stacks duration and is represented by a foot with a broken ankle. A crippled target will have their movement speed decreased by 50% and will visually limp around while under the effect of Cripple. Cripple can stack up to 5 times. Chilled stacks duration and is represented by a snowflake. Chilled reduces movement speed by 66% and also reduces the recharge time of your skills by about 40%. Chilled can stack up to 5 times, and characters afflicted by Chilled will have a blue tint to them. Blinded stacks duration and is represented by a completely white eye. Targets that are blind will have a 100% chance to miss their next attack, and upon missing the attack, 1 stack of blind will peel off. The target afflicted by blind will have a purple haze around their head, and if you're afflicted by blind, you'll see a darker overlay on your screen. Blind can stack 9 times. Slow stacks duration, and is represented by a turtle. Slowed targets have their skill speed and action speeds reduced by 50%. Targets will visibly appear slower as their animation speeds are slowed by 50%. Slow can stack up to 9 times. Weakness stacks duration, and is represented by a broken sword. Targets of weakness have their endurance regeneration reduced, and also half of their hits become glancing blows, which are going to deal 50% less damage. Weakness can stack up to 5 times. Immobile stacks duration, and is represented by 2 chains in an X pattern. Immobile freezes targets in place, stopping all movement animations. While immobile, the target cannot move, turn, or dodge. The target can continue to attack anything in range, but any skill that causes the player to physically move will just execute in place. Teleportation and Shadow Step can still work, but the immobilized target will still be immobile when they reappear. Immobilization can stack up to 3 times, and the immobile target appears bound by purple chains. Now, I know I said that there were 14 conditions, but I figured I should talk about the 15th condition. It's one that players can't inflict on other players, and it's called Agony. Agony stacks intensity and is represented by a saw wheel. This is a condition that is automatically applied in high-end fractals of the mists, and it's a difficulty mechanic, which reduces the player's health every second and makes healing less effective. This is the only condition that players can't remove from themselves, and they must mitigate this through special equipment upgrades. There are a bunch of skills, traits, and equipment upgrades that can remove or transfer boons and conditions, or convert boons into conditions, or conditions into boons, and some professions and specializations are better at this than others. I'm not going to tell you all the ways that this can happen because we're probably talking about hundreds of different skills and abilities, but if you type /wikiboon or /wikicondition into the chat box, you'll see that the community has done a really good job providing you all the ways that you can remove, transfer, and convert boons and conditions. You can also look at your skill and trait lists for your character on the hero panel and then identify the skills yourself. The skills or abilities would say something about the effect, like the Spellbreaker's Break Enchantment skill, which says, strike foes around you and remove their boons. Other times a skill will have a specific effect called out with an icon, like the Ranger's Signet of Renewal, which says, conditions transferred, 13. And as the Signet transfers conditions to your pet and gives it resistance, so those transferred conditions are pretty much ineffective. So I'm not a total cop-out. What I will cover quickly is which conditions convert into which boons, or which boons convert into which conditions. Check out the following tables. Each table shows which effects convert into another effect, the duration of the converted effect, and how many stacks you're going to receive. In the first table, we can see how boons are converting into conditions. This boon to condition mechanic is largely used by the Necromancer and its elite specializations as a way to screw up your boon-heavy enemies. Riding high with a ton of boons and then being screwed over by having a slew of conditions feels pretty bad. In the second table, we can see how conditions are going to convert into boons. Skills like the Engineer's Elixir C or Guardian's Contemplation of Purity will take the conditions on your target, which is oftentimes yourself, and convert them into boons. Well, that just about covered everything we need to know about boons and conditions. In the next video, we'll be looking at some of these conditions again, and we'll discuss crowd controls and interrupts, and we'll also look how we can nullify the effect of some conditions with stun breaks. We'll also be looking at an important mechanic called the Defiance Bar, and how many of your conditions can break the Defiance Bar, a super important mechanic that you need to understand for dungeons, open world legendary and champion battles, and story content. Anyways, thanks everybody for watching, subscribing, and sharing these videos. I really do appreciate it. I hope to have one of these videos come out every single week, so if you haven't subscribed, maybe you should. I'm not going to really burden your playlist with a bunch of videos. I'm kind of casually doing this, one could say. Anyways, until next time, guys.